operations here at Fort Vancouver. What we're about to demonstrate is the model 1841 Mountain Howitzer. Now the 1841 Mountain Howitzer is a unique weapon for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it was the very first weapon adopted by the U.S. government that was designed exclusively to fire exploding shells. Up to that time, artillery fired solid projectiles or fired grape shot or some variation thereof. They started experimenting and perfecting exploding artillery at the beginning of the 19th century. And for a little while there was a transition where they were basically adapting explosive technology to pre-existing cannons. But this weapon was designed right from the very get-go to be exclusively an explosive firing weapon. The second unique point of this weapon is that it's a mountain howitzer because it's designed to be taken down by two soldiers in about 5 to 7 minutes. You can take the barrel off the carriage, you can pull the wheels off the carriage, and it only takes 3 mules to haul the barrel, the carriage, and the ammunition. Anywhere a man can go, a mule can go. Anywhere a mule can go, this cannon can go. Now this cannon is what's known as a 12-pounder because the projectile that it fired weighed 12 pounds. Actually, just backwards there. No matter what type of cartridge you fired, I'm going to show 3 different variations. It would generally be about, well, it would always be 12 pounds, and it has a half-pound black powder charge attached to it. Now, it's very important that it always had the same amount of black powder, and the projectile always weighed the same amount, because this had a time fuse on it. And the only way you could get any sort of consistency with your timing is if you had a constant velocity. The only way you could get a constant velocity is have the same amount of powder and the same weight at all times. Now there was a type of fuse. It was called a Borman fuse, named after the artillery officer that designed it. And this fuse was hollow. This is not a live fuse, but if this were a live fuse, it'd be hollow, and there'd be a bit of foil over the front of it. And under that foil is a chemical burning agent, and embossed on the foil is 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way around up to 1,000 yards, which was the maximum effective range of this weapon. Say the artillery officer decided that they wanted to have the cannon shell explode at 400 yards. He would take a pick and he would actually punch a hole at the form. Now, because the chemical burn rate was at a known constant, and because the shell weighed the same every time and the black powder charge was the same every time, you can get reasonably accurate on having this thing explode at 400 yards. Now, you may be familiar from war movies, or if you're a veteran yourself, of impact explosive weapons. Think of like mortars and things like that. When they hit a building or hit the ground, they explode. This was not an impact exploding weapon. This was an airburst weapon. It was designed to be fired over the heads of the enemy and explode, basically raining down shrapnel on top of the people. Now, the type of the earliest type of projectile that's being shown by Ranger Ochoa is basically just a hollow iron ball, and it has a charge of black powder in it, and it's basically just a hollow cannonball. And so when the fuse hit, we'll use 400 for the example, hits 400, it goes down a tube in the ball and it explodes. Now the problem with having a hollow cast iron ball is cast iron is very brittle, and especially 19th century cast iron has a lot of inclusions in it. It's relatively dirty. It could have air pockets, so basically you have no control over how that thing shatters. It might shatter into 100 pieces, just one small chunk of it may come out. You don't want to be standing next to it no matter what happens, but there's a high level of inconsistency. So they decided to change it a little bit, and they took the same projectile and basically filled that hollow area that was filled with pure black powder with black powder and musket balls. So now it acted basically like a giant fragmentation grenade. And so it would airburst over the enemy and spray musket balls down at high velocity on top of whoever happened to be under it. That is what you would use when your enemy is at a distance. However, if it looks like your position is going to be overrun and the enemy is closing in on you, there is a last-ditch weapon, or a last-ditch load, I should say. This is a canister shot, and it has a little window window here to show you the musket balls. The originals would not have that little window, it'd just be solid tin. But this is 12 pounds of musket balls. And when this fired, it acted like a tremendously large shotgun with a bore that size.
Whoa.
Standing in front of that.
Wow.
However, as effective as it is, it's an extremely short-range weapon. We're talking like maybe 50 or 100 yards at most. So you'd only use this if you felt that your life was in grave danger to basically push the enemy back out away from you. Now this weapon was adopted in 1841. It was used in the war with Mexico. It was used during the Civil War, and it was also used extensively out here during the Indian Wars in the 1870s and 80s. It was very useful out here because unlike the East, which was highly developed, agricultural, had lots of roads, you could move heavy artillery around, and this light artillery just could not compete with the big boys. The heavy artillery just had more range and more power, and so this was very good against people without artillery. So this was very popular for use against dismounted troops, Native Americans, cavalry, people like that. It was more of a psychological weapon than a very effective combat weapon. Obviously you don't want to be standing around when it goes off, but it also had a degree of inaccuracy that would be unacceptable today. This weapon was basically replaced in the 1880s when self-contained breech-loading artillery that we still use today was developed. However, in 1898, when the United States went to war against Spain and fought in Cuba, the U.S. Army was very unprepared for the war, and the U.S. Army was minuscule at that time, extremely small. And so a lot of volunteer regiments were formed, and a lot of state militias were called up, and they were using obsolete military equipment. Think single-shot black powder muskets, single-shot breech-loading, trapdoor Springfields, and they were also using these 1841 Mountain Howitzers, whereas the U.S. Army had the more modern technology. So not only was this the first weapon to use exploding shells, but it was also the longest serving artillery piece in U.S. history. So what we're going to do here in just a moment is demonstrate the firing of it. Are there any quick questions before we demonstrate the procedure? Oh, yes. It's going to be very loud. Now obviously guys, we're not going to be firing a live combat load, but we are going to be firing a ½ pound of black powder. So it's going to have the same power, it's going to have the same amount of smoke, and it's going to be very loud. So I'll give you a warning, but when the gun commander says make ready, you guys are going to want to cover your ears because it's going to be very, very loud. Yes? Well, the maximum effective range is 1,000 yards, but if you elevated that bore 45 degrees and just wanted to see how far the ball would go, it could go over a mile.
Whoa.
It's pretty powerful. It's real powder, but there won't be any explosive shell. All right, folks. So we'll start demonstrating with blank cartridge load. So at this point, the crew is going to assume their positions around the gun.
With blank cartridge, load by detail, load.
So the gun commander's first operation is to check the vent to be clear. And so a pick is sent down the vent to physically check the vent. And the next step is the bore is going to be swabbed with a wet sponge. That's necessary if you've been firing the weapon because the black powder fouling present in the bore could hold sparks that linger, which obviously would be very bad news if you put fresh black powder in there when there's already a spark going. Now the bore is being loaded with the blank cartridge. And the next step is to ram it down so it's very tight against the breech.
Ram.
The gunner is now breaking the seal on the cartridge so that the primer will be able to set fire to the main charge. And now the gun is going to be aimed. Okay, the weapon is now in the correct position.
Right.
Weapon is now being primed with a chemical friction primer that just operates with a pull of a hand. Now at this point, guys, you'll want to cover your ears because this is very, very loud.
Ready? Fire!
Damn.
Cool. Woo! Good job.
Now at this point, they're going to check to make sure that the bore is clear on the weapon and they're going to secure the piece. You could generally fire about 2 shots a minute. A very well-trained crew could fire 3 shots a minute. Obviously, if you have more guns, that gives you better firepower. All right. So we're going to be firing the weapon 2 more times at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So if you'd like to see that again or know someone who'd like to see it, we welcome you to do that. And then also, as soon as they're done securing the piece, you folks are invited to come up and photograph the weapon. You can touch it, you can check it out. Kids, go up and check it out real close. Did you have a question? Well, we're going to shoot it in 1 hour, so if you're still here in an hour, we're going to do the same thing that we just did in 1 hour. Yes?
Do you know where the blanks actually land?
Well, the blanks don't actually land. It just sends the burning powder out of the bore, and it just burns up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they ever make a serrated round for this thing?
Nope. This was purely an explosive round weapon, and the only non-explosive round was that last-ditch canister ammunition that I showed. So, but yeah, if you folks want to come on the other side of the rope, you're more than welcome to come up and check the weapon out.